Have you seen the ads for a new anti-aging supplement called Fatty15? It is apparently not just beneficial, but essential to your health, specifically combating something called cellular fragility syndrome. Let's take a closer look, shall we? Hello, this is Monica Reinagel, and you are listening to the Nutrition Diva podcast, a show that takes a closer look at food and nutrition research, headlines, and trends to sort fact from fiction and help you make more informed decisions about what you eat and buy. I do not watch cable news. First, because I value my sanity, and also because I think there are probably better ways to stay informed. But the televisions that hang above the cardio equipment at my gym are permanently tuned to cable news and also, weirdly, cooking shows. I mean, who wants to watch people eat while they're exercising? Because I am always sort of looking at the cable news shows, I couldn't help but notice a frequently recurring ad spot for a new supplement called Fatty15. I was curious, so I decided to check it out. According to the manufacturer, Fatty15 supplies a saturated fatty acid called pentadecanoic acid, which is essential for cellular health, strengthening cell membranes, and preventing premature cell death. It is also said to reduce inflammation, improve metabolic health and liver function, most impressively of all, to combat cellular fragility syndrome. In fact, Fatty15 is being positioned as not just beneficial, but actually necessary for optimal health and longevity, suggesting that a deficiency of this fatty acid, which, you guessed it, is much more likely without supplementation, is going to result in poor health and decreased health and longevity. Those are some pretty big claims for a supposedly essential fatty acid that few nutritionists have even heard of. So let's take a closer look. Pentadecanoic acid is the common name for a saturated fatty acid containing 15 carbon atoms, and that makes it a bit unusual because most saturated fats have an even number of carbon atoms. And in fact, some argue that these odd chain fatty acids, like pentadecanoic acid, play a unique role in human health. The primary dietary source for these odd chain fatty acids is butterfat. Butter, cream, whole milk dairy products. And the presence of these fatty acids might be part of the reason that saturated fats from dairy products don't seem to have the same negative effects that saturated fats from other foods do. If you consume full-fat dairy products, you might get 50 to 150 milligrams per day of pentadecanoic acid from your diet. If you don't consume dairy or you gravitate to low-fat or fat-free options, well, then your dietary intake of this nutrient will be far less. Now, interestingly, if you are following a very high-fat diet, such as a ketogenic diet, that might dramatically reduce the amount of pentadecanoic acid that you can absorb from those foods, blunting the potential benefits. Now, you will see references to pentadecanoic acid as an essential fatty acid, but it is not officially recognized as an essential nutrient. Neither is there a recommended daily intake for this nutrient. However, there has been some research associating higher dietary intake or higher blood levels of this fatty acid with increased longevity and lower risks of developing conditions such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, or heart failure. These are mostly correlations. And in the show notes, I'll include links to a handful of articles in peer-reviewed journals reviewing the existing research and making the case for pentadecanoic acid as an essential fatty acid. Although these papers have cleared the peer review process, it at least bears mentioning that the primary author for most of these papers works for the company that holds the patent for this particular fatty acid, as well as for the company that sells it as a supplement. I'm not saying there's not a good case to be made here. Rather, we may only be hearing one side of it. And, as you might expect, once we leave the scientific literature and turn to the marketing materials, things get a lot more exciting. One of the primary arguments and claims for the Fatty15 supplement is that it provides protection against cellular fragility syndrome. And one of the problems with this claim is that this appears to be a completely invented condition. According to the company that sells Fatty15, cellular fragility syndrome affects approximately 1 in 3 people, despite the fact that this syndrome is not recognized by any medical authority, detectable by any lab test, or included in any standard diagnostic classifications. And the best way to prevent or reverse this condition is, well, you can probably guess. You might also be impressed by what appears to be the volume of scientific research supporting this new discovery. The marketing materials cite over 100 peer-reviewed studies to support the benefits of this very special fatty acid, the benefits of which were first identified, by the way, by scientists who were studying dolphins. Who doesn't love dolphins? But among those 100 or more peer-reviewed studies, there appeared to be only 2 randomized controlled trials of pentadecanoic acid in humans. And one of those simply demonstrates that if you take it as a supplement, it will increase the levels of the fatty acid in your blood. In fact, the vast majority of all of these studies to support this supplement are assays of cell cultures in petri dishes or animal studies or correlations observed in population studies. It's not that there's nothing here, but as often happens in the world of nutritional supplements, the marketing has gotten way ahead of what is promising but still extremely preliminary research. As one critic expressed it, the marketing behind Fatty15 is essentially the equivalent of selling tickets to a concert before the band has even confirmed that they're playing. But what about all these rapturous testimonials from users who are convinced that this supplement has transformed their health or is responsible for positive changes in their lab work? Well, these kinds of anecdotal reports have the same weaknesses that I mentioned just recently in my episode on raw milk. There's reporting bias, where positive results are much more likely to be documented than no results. There are uncontrolled variables where the user makes a whole bunch of changes at once, but then ascribes the results that they see to just one of them. And of course, the placebo effect, which is especially hard to avoid when you're trying to assess effects like energy, mental clarity, or reduced cravings. Okay, so the evidence that this supplement will make you healthier or make your cells less fragile or extend your longevity might still be pretty limited. But is there any downside? Well, the good news is that there doesn't appear to be any real safety concerns. And in fact, because this fatty acid does not have any effect on blood clotting, it may be even a bit safer than old school fish oil supplements. Really, the main hazard that I can see, other than making this type of hype profitable, thereby encouraging more of the same, is the possible harm to your wallet. This supplement will cost you $40, $50 a month. So if you are intrigued by this emerging research, but not enough to add an expensive supplement to your regimen, you could hedge your bets by including more pentadecanoic acid-rich foods in your diet. So in order to get 150 milligrams, that's the amount in 1 capsule of Fatty15, you'd need to consume about 1.5 cups of whole milk or whole milk yogurt, or 3 tablespoons of butter or cream, or any combination of that. So maybe 1 cup of milk or yogurt and then 1 tablespoon of butter or cream. You get the idea. So that seems pretty doable. It would add about 12 grams of saturated fat to your diet, which is still well below the recommended upper limit of 20 grams for saturated fat. And plus, as I mentioned before, the saturated fats in dairy do not appear to have the same negative effects as saturated fats from other sources. For example, dairy fats do not appear to raise cholesterol levels or heart disease risk. In fact, some studies have linked the consumption of full-fat dairy to lower risks of both obesity and heart disease. And plus, you'd also get the calcium, the protein, and the other nutrients that you wouldn't get from a fatty acid supplement. In the meantime, it will be interesting to see how the science on this fatty acid continues to evolve, and I promise to keep you posted. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, you can email it to me at nutrition@quickanddirtytips.com. And if you'd like to find out about having me speak at your next live or virtual event or conference, you can learn more at wellnessworkshere.com. Nutrition Diva is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast. Steve Riekeberg is the audio engineer. Brandon Getches provides script editing. Holly Hutchings is the digital operations specialist. And Morgan Christensen heads up podcast operations and advertising. And we also get indispensable support from Nat Hoops. Thanks to all of them. But most of all, thanks to you for listening.